to the cloud, and I'm going to now share my screen, and I'm going to close the whiteboard for a moment so that I can share this screen. Come on, cursor. You should be looking at desktop one. It says share. Sorry, I manage by talking to myself. It's how I keep myself in order. Okay, here we go. Let's go to this first screen right now. Some of the things that you are going to be reading about in this book, Adaptive Action, is obviously adaptive action. I want you to recognize that when the people who wrote this book thought about human systems, they look at it not just as something to study and explain and be this entity that is to be observed, but their whole approach is that it is adapted. We work through complexity by observing the patterns in a model in the system in order to be able to create change. So their whole approach to complexity is to change things, is to make improvements, is to deal with human beings, with human systems that are constantly in flux. And I think when you start this, one of the things that intrigued me about this book is it talks about leveraging uncertainty in your organization. So that we think of systems and we think of organizations when we think of human systems. When we think of systems, sometimes you've got mechanical systems, you have biological systems, they're all over the place. We know that. However, their focus is strictly human systems, which brings in culture and language and history and background and all those deep-seated layers that we intellectually know exist. And all your studies tell you that culture matters. But this really takes into account, but am I accounting for that? Am I looking for it, and am I seeing the patterns that have emerged over time? And I'm going to just do something that just came to mind. As some of you know, I was just in Mexico, and I've been to this one place several times with students. And one of the things that we try to do when we take our students, our pre-service teachers, to Mexico is for them to understand the history and the background. Who are the Mexican people? Where do they come from? Well, we know that colonization was a factor in making the Mexico that exists today. We know that, that there were layers and all of Latin America. When they were conquered by the Spaniards, they flattened the land and totally destroyed the Native American way of life and just built on top. And it's only through history and excavation that those layers are being revealed. And I think that for me, that's a very passionate subject and something very interesting. And so I'm constantly asking myself, so why does that matter? Why are the people that exist today impacted or affected by any of that? And coming from a Latin American heritage, and I look around and I meet people constantly. I just came from a venue where I was with people, and I thought, oh my gosh, I feel at home when I'm with other Spanish speakers. And there's something bonding, not because we just met, but because there's a history that has bonded us all in the past. And perhaps you felt that kind of kinship, and you see patterns in the way you behave, the way you talk, the way you interact, etc. Well, all of those are part of a system, so to speak. So one of the things that I'm going to be asking, and I can get lost in story, so I will stop, and you have to stop me sometimes. But one of the things that I want you to think about is whatever your sticky issue is, whatever your problem or whatever you think you might want to research, and it can be something as mundane as how to teach writing, which is what I did, or something very complex like how to change scores on a test, at a whole district level. I mean, there's so many different ways. Nothing is right or wrong, but there's many, many layers that I want you to think about it. And I want you to think whatever you identify your system to be as an ecosystem. It's a living entity. that is in constant flux. And one of the first things that you will find in your handouts, and I think I made it supplementary because it's described in the book. So those supplementary readings are, if you're like me, when you read something challenging for the first time, your brain starts to numb, go to sleep, you get tired, you need to take a break. It's just, one can easily become overwhelmed and you have to come in and out of it. And this is a fast-paced course. So I respect that learning journey that you may be encountering, plus the other courses and other things that you're probably having to deal with. And I have to say it will get easier. The more you read and that something, it suddenly you find, I remember when I got my job at the university and I started delving back into a lot of the things that I had studied, whether I was a researcher or a colleague teaching a course, I can remember thinking, oh my gosh, I read this like it's just water dripping down out of the faucet. It's just, I just do it. It's so natural. It's so much a part of me now. But when I was in your shoes, it was very much not a part of me, and I struggled. And I worked really, really hard and took a lot of notes and had to reread a lot and overdid a lot of things. So I hope that the way that I provide you with information isn't overwhelming, but meant to allow you to read in a way that supports whoever you are. And I don't know you as individuals. So let me know what I need to change to make it work for you. So the point that see, I got lost again. Let me go back. Um, think about your system as an ecosystem. You're going to have to name it tonight. You can change you can decide you're looking at it from a different perspective, and that's okay too, because it's yours. This is yours to work with. I want you to think of it as something living, which is why we work through this concept of adaptive action. So this works in the eyes of human systems dynamics through ongoing cycles of inquiry, reflection, and action. And this is my favorite diagram in the whole world. I have used this in so many contexts. You'll see it when I sometimes make an assignment and I think, okay, what are all those subparts? Like my brain's fried. I can't think of all the details, but I always go back to what, so what, now what? What is it we're talking about? What are the questions? What are the key things? Answer that question. There's lots of what questions. So why does that matter? This takes you into deeper reflection. And now what? Now what am I going to do about it? What's my next wise action? And we started a little bit of that in our last set of questioning. We didn't get to go very deep, so I feel like you were a little bit cheated, but don't worry, you'll be asking a lot of questions along the way. So, and then of course, we notice it ends in the concept of action. So whatever it is that your inquiry is, you may be just going for a dissertation because that's what your program asks for. But in the end, because you're getting an EDD, your dissertation is meant to be something that you can actually enact. You're going to go back and take it back to the field, to whatever it is that you do. So this inquiry cycle is something that I want you to carry with you for the rest of your journey throughout your courses and into your professional lives as well. I think you'll find it simple. It's elegant, simple, and useful. And that's a motto that HSD is. It has to be true and useful. We only find out if it's true or not through our research and through the cycle of inquiry, because one question always leads to a new question constantly. If not, we're not good researchers. So that concept of adaptive action is one of our tools you're going to be using throughout. You'll see it. And then there's another tool that you will read about, and that's also called pattern logic. So this is focused on seeing, understanding, and influencing patterns in the system. So of course you have to identify which system am I looking at today? Is it a system? Is it my classroom? Is it the boardroom? Is it my family? Is it a set of laws or a legislation? Is it a testing system? All of these they are influenced by the patterns that have driven them to become what they are, and they're in constant flux. Anyone in education knows that things change from day to day, if not As soon as you tell my pre-service teachers, I don't really, please close your ears. I will tell them, I don't care about your lesson plans. I do care, but I don't, because I know that as soon as I teach you this lesson plan template, you're going to go get a job and they're going to tell you, oh, we do it this way. It doesn't even look like that. And as soon as you master it, they're going to say, oh, we changed our mind. It's okay. We're going to use this one. So forget everything you just learned. We're on, but the principles, that logic, that those patterns that drove and made these teachers, and I said, what I do care about is the thinking that you do behind developing those lessons and making the decisions that you make day to day in the classroom and for those students. That's what matters. The lesson plans, it's a requirement to write it down, and it helps you think. So it's not a waste of time. But I was the terrible teacher that did them when they came back to me and said, Laura, I have to have them in this lesson filing cabinet because it's the law. So please, you got to get them in on time. I did eventually. Took me a while. I'm a hard sell. So here we have this concept of pattern logic. Look at the diagram for just a second. So what you will see is we talk, I think I mentioned to somebody in some piece of writing, you've got your agents. We've got agents all over the place. Let's see if I can make that bigger for you, anyone, and make it more visible. The agents are constantly interacting. So who are the agents? Well, the agents can be people, but an agent can also be another system within the system. It could be, if you're talking about, and I'm just trying to pick something out of the blue, it's a curriculum. It could be the curriculum. It could be the guidelines set by the district. It could be the TEKS. It could be anything that interacts with it. So it's not just a person. When you think of an agent, we typically think of a person. So it doesn't have to necessarily be a person, but they're constantly interacting in some, and you can see these lines go everywhere. It's not, they may have linear relationships, but those lead to something else, and then they keep going around constantly. And so all of this interaction then influences other actions that are to come. So we know that if I tell my students, you're going to sit in straight rows and you're not going to talk, we know that there's going to be a consequence to that. Either I'm going to go crazy because that's not going to happen, or kids are going to get bored or they're not going to learn well, because we know they need to interact, but there's a consequence to everything as it goes on. And I pick very simple thoughts out of that come to mind in a moment. And then from that, you can see that these system-wide patterns emerge. And that's what we want to be constantly looking at. In your situations for this course, you are only going to be looking at this from your system from where it stands in your mind as you know it, or any kind of research that you happen to do in terms of understanding your system better. Please correct me, but it's my understanding that none of you have reached the dissertation point. You're building toward that. So my work evolved over time, and then it came out that I was really looking at things from a complexity perspective. So that became a chapter in my dissertation, but it was not the basis for all of my my examination first, and when I first started doing it. So this is.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
I'm sorry.
no problem.
This, I don't know if you can, this is Sophia again. And so I guess I'm trying to synthesize everything because I know that everything that you're saying is definitely like the breakdown of it, because I was trying to apply that to my problem practice or my question.
Yes.
And I think where I am kind of stuck, no, I don't think stuck is the accurate word. I would say trying to figure out how to, because I know I'm gonna have to change my question. I know in your the last class when I watched it, you talked about how your question may change over time, and that's okay. And I'm guessing it's like, how do we change based on this information? Like the agents, like, I mean, so we may start off like Addie, her agent is working with sixth grade geometry students and differentiating in the classroom. Like her thing was trying to figure out that part. When we look at the patterns and how do we narrow that down? Like I'm just trying to figure out how do we get to that point to where it's this so we can say, okay, this is the agent. And let me look at my notes here.
How do you identify the
Um,
different parts?
yes, I guess I'm trying to be able to identify because we know that systems are parts and wholes. And, we're looking at the interaction. And I think I'm trying to make it to where my term or my ideas are not as broad and being able to apply it to what you're saying. Like, how do we do that? What is a way that we can bring it down to narrow it down to be able to fit into this, because I think mine is so broad that I'm struggling synthesizing how I understand it's in isolation perfectly fine. Like those videos, especially even though that the one video explaining um the oh gosh, what was it? He was explaining the difference between two C's, y'all. Somebody help me out. What was it? Complex and complicated. Like, so
Mhm.
when I look at that, I had to go back and watch that so I could figure out how to be able to bring my thoughts into this model. Because like you said, we only have a couple of weeks and we have the diagram that we're trying to put in. So it's just a lot of information trying to and I just want to make sure that I'm not too broad and I'm hanging out here. I guess I'm trying
Okay.
to ask the question
Hear you.
on how to bring it down. I don't know if that made sense.
I totally hear you. One thing I will say is that there's not a right answer. So I can't say to you, these are your agents and these are your um, interactions and such. This is something that you will have to decide and discover in the process of the thinking and the writing, and hopefully what I want you to look at in a few minutes and see what emerges for you in the understanding. I can certainly sit and with you or any of us, and one of the goals is maybe for you all to maybe work in small groups where you talk to each other and help each other through that questioning pattern that I tried to that I didn't spend long enough time with last week is that when I've done the questioning with people, we end up thinking of things from so many different perspectives that we decide, well, which one is the one that matters most to us? And which one speaks to us most, because we all start way out here. I can't tell you how many times I was told when I was working on in my doctoral courses, I've got to bring it in, I was told, frame your windows, Laura, frame your windows. You've got to narrow that focus because otherwise it is too unwieldy. And that's what you're feeling right now. So it'll take time. And I'm happy to work with you. We can continue to talk at various places, but let's see if this helps. I can't guarantee anything. I don't know. You're going to have to tell me this works or this doesn't work. So one of the things that I'd like to, let's see if I can make that a little more legible. One of the things to think about is this concept of what is you'll see in the tools. It's also the CDE model. And these were the things that were in that article that Sandra referred to. I love that article, that writing article, because she talks about, well, this is how I use these systems, the HSD models, to be able to do my research. So it gives you that insider's view. So by reading that article, and maybe you have to read it a couple of times, you think, oh, well, that's how you could make all of this make sense for me. So think of CDE stands for containers, differences, and exchanges. So these are the conditions that shape the speed, the path, and the direction of self-organization. We know cognitively, because we saw the videos and it makes sense to us, that systems self-organize. They do, I mean, it sounds like miraculous, but they really do. Things take a shape of their own, which is sometimes good, or sometimes it's unwieldy, and therefore it leads to uncertainty and it's chaos and it doesn't make sense to us. But we know also that within that, there are boundaries within all the different parameters. Let's call it, maybe you think of agents maybe as parameters, okay? So containers is something that holds the system together long enough for it to self-organize and generate a pattern. So I want you to think for just a second about maybe each one of you can put into the chat box. Let me try to slow it down a little bit to help you process this. Please put, what do you think is, what would you call your ecosystem? What do you want to call your system? Just give it a title.
So I went and I guess, and this is why I feel like I did too much and why I'm so confused. Like I went to go look at my ideas and I found PK through 12 education ecosystem framework to try to help myself kind of organize this because I'm really confused on what my ecosystem would be. Like, is that the classroom? Is that the learning space of the teacher? Because again, I'm trying to narrow it down. And so this one, finding that framework helped me kind of put some things into smaller pieces, like focusing on equity, quality, and collaboration. Those match some of the themes that I found in interviews that I had done. And so I went in and it really looks at fostering partnerships across the stakeholders. And so where it's not one leader, so I was seeing how all that kind of plays a role. So I guess I really don't know. So would the ecosystem be where the teacher is learning in the professional development or where the teacher is executing what they have learned?
I think it might be easier to look at it as where they're executing it. My ecosystem was a 7th grade classroom. It was a 7th grade writing classroom at that particular time. But you could also say it is writing instruction as a whole, because I was looking at how do teachers, what are the conditions, shall I say, what do teachers do? Excuse me, I'm going to close my office door. I'll be right back. Hey, buddy, I'm going to talk to you. Oh, you found goodies. Awesome. You make your whole sucker. Awesome. I will talk to you I'll talk to you in 30 minutes. Oh, it's a lollipop. Sorry, got it wrong. I have grandchildren who keep me eternally engaged and entertained, but I'll also get distracted, so forgive me. So my system, I think it was writing instruction as a whole, because that's what I was looking at. One of the agents was 7th grade teachers. They happened to be the teacher because I was looking in their classrooms. One of them, and they were two very different teachers. One dealt mainly with gifted kids, and the other one was very much dealt with online or on level students. But my whole system was how do people teach writing, and I wanted to know what are the best practices for teaching, but it wasn't just writing, and I narrowed it and focused it and narrowed it down to expository writing specifically in this case, because writing's pretty huge. There's a lot of literature out there on that, but I only wanted to know about expository. So something that holds the system together long enough to self-organize and generate patterns is, you could say that our container could be our classroom, what all these, and we were all curriculum writers. I happen to know some of these teachers because I knew they were good because we were all called to central office to write curriculum for the district. So we had a certain ideology in place, that might have been good or bad but I knew that it followed a set of guidelines that I used in my dissertation as what they call a priori. So that was a container that kept us in common view. Yes, Sandra, I see a hand. Ooh, these tools work.
So I guess my question would be, would my ecosystem be effective writing instruction in K-12? A container might be the reading department within my district.
Yes, you could do that, definitely. Because
Okay.
it's within you all have this common goal and common set of circumstances that you have to work within.
Okay. Okay, I'm following along. So that's making sense.
And I think that what I'd like you all to do is just to give yourself some grace and opportunity to think. This is going to be very reflective. Again, it's not going to necessarily be the right answer. Although I know that's what you want, because we all want certainty. But you'll know when it's right, when your committee will help you. I'm not trying to help you write your dissertation right now. If you want me on your committee when it comes time, that's a whole nother subject and another conversation. But at this point in time, I'm just helping you to, I hope to help you to open the doors in order to close and bring it to a stopping point that will become manageable for you. Because it is unwieldy, as Sophia has described. It's not manageable for her yet. And sometimes it takes a few years to get to that point. I also want you to think about the differences in your system. What are the diversities within the system and because these differences are what creates the energy for change. And on the next, I'm thinking that our next session, I'm going to talk a lot more about differences, because that's where my radar went to that, because I kept finding things that conflicted with each other. For example, my teachers that I was observing had to follow certain guidelines because they were preparing for a test. And yet they believed in being able to have free writing, and they believed in open prompts, and they had a belief system that was much more wholesome than the narrow focus that test taking takes them. So this was a constant battle. And I kept seeing this, and yet they were masterful. And so my question ultimately became, and I think I mentioned this to someone forgive me, I haven't responded to all of the things that you've submitted, but I try to be thoughtful, so it takes me some time. But one of the things is that look for the conditions that your people, your subjects, whatever you're studying, what conditions do they set to be successful, to make something happen? And ultimately, that's why my dissertation, wherever it is called Conditions for Teaching Writing, Exploring the Cases of 7th Grade Teachers' Expository Writing Instruction. And it was purely exploratory. It was not because I was just going in there and saying, show me what you got. Let me just look. Let me be a fly on the wall for a while. And I recorded everything. And then I looked for the patterns, because the system, and effectively I had two systems. I had the system of each one of those classrooms, and that little ecosystem that each one of those teachers had that looked very different from each other. And yet they were very similar, because they had the same curriculum. They had the same test. They had the same district guidelines. They had the same grade level expectations. But they had very different kinds of kids. And they brought very different examples. One of them did different practices. Like one of them brought in mentor texts that were very scripted, and the other one brought mentor texts that came out of literature that the kids brought. And so, but we found out that they both had structure in their room. That was and I should, let me share that more specifically, those models. You saw the big diagram, which was a compilation of all those little bits and pieces, which probably made your head spin. Each one of those was a piece that made sense, that came out of my work. So I ultimately ended up writing a lot more about those differences, because they were what we call tension in complexity thinking. Now, tension is not good or bad. When you think of a rubber band, you know it's going to snap. If you keep pulling at it, it's going to break, and somebody's going to get hurt. Your fingers are going to hurt. But tension is, think of it as, I looked at it as something along a spectrum. And it is simply with that tension, those teachers had to take action because they had to figure out how to balance those rules, the testing rubric, the fact that they had to get those kids prepared, and the guidelines and all of the things that come with the pressures of testing, with the freedom that they wanted their students to have authentic writing experiences. And they brought authenticity. One of them did a really good job because she brought authenticity through certain days where she would just have them do genius hour that was an example that she brought in. She brought in real world literature and such that was in current events to help them develop their expository, because she wanted them to be exposed to enough ideas that they had something to write about, which is often a problem with kids when it's too narrowly focused. So think about what binds you in your system, or the people, the circumstances, the situation in your system. What binds them together? What's the identity? What is there? And in this case, you could say our identity is that we are all STARS tested subjects in that case. That is something that definitely binds us, whether we like it or not. It is part of the identity of that system. And then what are the differences? What are the tensions? What are the things that are so diverse that it kind of makes things a little bit rocky and feel uncomfortable? But it's in that rockiness that change can occur, because we know when two heads start to find a solution, we know that's something that is a form of energy, and change will occur, hopefully for the better, but not always. And then the exchanges, the energy and information are shared throughout the system. The exchanges is you could say the exchange could have been a peer conference, a writing conference. It could have been how she was actually teaching a particular concept. Ultimately, what I wanted you to do, let me go back and read this to make sure I haven't forgotten about something. Adaptive action and pattern logic are the two practices based on the assumption that the three conditions shape the patterns in all complex systems, or complex adaptive systems. So containers, differences, and exchanges, those are also conditions, whatever they sum up to be. That interaction, I know I'm oversimplifying something that probably is a little confusing in your brain right now, but all of those things generate new patterns, because that's what complexity does. And one of those patterns, or something in particular, is going to be the difference that makes a difference. Now, that's not meant to be a play on words that gives you a headache, but if you really think about and slow that down and think about those words, which one of those differences, which one of those tensions was the thing that had the largest impact? Maybe that's what you're looking for in your research. You don't know what it's going to be. And you won't know this until you have data to analyze. So I'm not asking you to answer any questions. To a certain degree, you're framing your system, your question, because you're looking at it from a systemic perspective. Is this making any sense to anyone? A little bit? Have I made it worse? If I've made it worse, you're going to have to say something. I know it's going to take time. It will take time. And I'm happy to meet with anyone on the side to work this out when it gets too muddy. And I'll try to give you feedback as you submit things. So
Dr.
what
Slay,
yes.
sorry, do you know, in the resources for this week, I haven't had a chance to look at module 2 yet, but are there examples of that CDE model that we can look at, like looking at several times how different people set it up, so that we can maybe do our own little pattern recognition and pull out, what that looks like in in different examples. I don't know. I just feel like I need to see it several times in different problem context to like get it.
Sherry, you are, I totally appreciate you, because anytime I ever speak, whether when I was a classroom teacher, a literacy coach, there was always one person said, but what does that look like? And I think that's what you're asking for, which is very reasonable. So I do actually have some examples. I'm not sure if you can, I can't see myself. So can you see this book? Yeah.
Yes.
Which you can buy, and it's not that expensive. It is written by my dear friend Leslie Patterson. But I'm using some of the stuff that you're reading on these slides is coming out of here, and she makes this super, super simple. And so I will get you copies of pages from this that you can use, because she uses real school examples from it. The other book that is going to make that even clearer than the adaptive action book is this one called Radical Rules for School, because it's all about specifically schools doing using adaptive action and using these models. And on hindsight, perhaps those are the books we should have bought, but I apologize. I've never taught this course before, so thank you for working with me. I'm grateful for this opportunity. And this book right here, Adaptive Action, will give you they will talk it through in a way that makes sense to you. And sometimes I've actually listened to the audio recording of it. If you hear her voice, which is very lovely and sweet, you can get sleepy. But if you take it in stride, or maybe have the book and then do the audio recording, it just flows. And it's not a hard book to read. It's just a lot of stuff to get to, like what you're doing. It's a lot of stuff to process. But I think that they do give you some examples in here too, but I'll try to be very explicit and try to find what you're looking for, Sherry. Because I'm
Thank
sure
you.
others would enjoy that too. So what I want you to do is, I put up that bulletin board earlier because I thought it would be a way for us to get started thinking about this in your own systems. And maybe you tell me, we can either choose one person who wants to think it through, or we can go into breakout rooms and you can kind of talk about it together with each other, because I think you just need work time. But here's some things to think about. Here, we're combining the what, so what, now what, the adaptive action cycle. And what you do is you think about what is it that's going on in your system right now. And that's part of it is you've already described that in your problem. What is it that you see? What are other people saying and doing? How do you know this is happening? What patterns are you seeing? And some of these questions are so simple that you think, is this for real? I mean, why am I having to pay tuition to ask these questions? But at the same time, it's a process. I mean, you have to break it down, and you actually have to cause yourself to think through that process in order to, it's almost like what we say in writing is you've got to write and write and write. And you're going to find that when you write your dissertation, you have to write until you figure out what you're saying. You think you know what you're saying when you start. You'll find it will change and evolve by the time you're done. You might be on the same thread, but you're actually going to find your voice through the exercise of writing. And that's part of what this is going to do. So what resources exist or do you have within your system? Anything else that's not mentioned? So what does that mean? What patterns dominate? If you don't write them down, if you don't even write what you think is the most silly thing, you won't see it. So you have to go through the exercise to make it for them to reveal and emerge. Do you need more diversity in your system, or do you need more coherence? You never thought about that. I never thought about it. Do you need more adaptive action? Do you need people asking and questioning and going through this reflective cycle with themselves? Do you have everybody just going along mundanely, just doing their jobs? Or do you have a lot of conflict? Interdependence is part of that whole concept of diversity, because interdependence takes you to the concept that these tensions actually work together because they depend on each other to function. That's why it's not good or bad. And so what are the options for action? So if you take the time to answer some of those questions, you might start to answer some of the things that you were thinking about, Sophia, for example. And others, I'm sure many of you are all thinking along the same lines as Sophia. So what's your next wise action? We're going back to that questioning cycle that we started with last week in a different format. What else do you need to know? This now what may not surface as much because you don't have a lot of data, but you can still ask yourselves based on your so what's, am I going to narrow my focus? Is that my next wise action? Am I only going to look at one part of my system? And that's what I think when I hear most people in all of your shoes at this point in time, we all think this way. All of us, every single one of us has. And we've had to narrow it down to just looking at one little tiny piece. And you think, but that's so insignificant. Oh, it's not. Because I had to learn as a qualitative researcher, and this does lead toward qualitative research, is that it takes a lot of people doing this kind of thing for it to make an impact, because you're constantly reiterating and helping, you're confirming that this is true and real, or you're saying, no, you guys were all wrong. I need you to look at a new way of thinking. So your research does matter. And if it's quantitative, you just have a different collection of data. You're just analyzing it quantitatively as opposed to creating, there are quantitative models of complexity, but I couldn't even begin to tell you about that. I'm not a math person. And they exist, but I don't know, that's not my field. So I'd have to do some study on that. What support do you need? Then what
Dr.
else?
Slay,
Yes.
I'm sorry. I hate to keep interrupting you. I feel like I just have this. So that I'm understanding, and because as you were talking, I was trying to figure out, especially when when you said what part of the system, like is what looking at the system. So if I was to look at my whole system, which is the teacher, the adult in the classroom, and how they are implementing, supporting, and executing remediation and reading, but not just there, going a little bit further, like higher up. How are we implementing, supporting, and executing teacher development so that the teacher can execute on their end? So when I look at that and I look at the different systems, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I have a question. That's my hand. I'm raising my hand. If you don't mind, can I stop you for a quick second? Okay.
No problem.
In your example, I'm thinking I heard, and everybody, you help with this discussion, please. I heard two systems going on. I heard you talking about professional development. Do you want to look at how teachers are prepared to teach reading more effectively? Or do you want to, and the ultimate impact is going to be improved scores and stronger readers? Or are you looking at the strategies that teachers are teaching?
Not necessarily. I think down the road, we may look at the effective strategies, but I think the most effective strategy that's in the building is having a well-prepared teacher. Like that is your high leverage. And so I am looking at how we are supporting those teachers, how we're holding the stakeholders accountable. So when I look at my agents, I look at all those stakeholders.
I just heard you mention accountability, and I heard you talk about professional development. You have two different questions. They're not wrong questions, not bad questions, but is that attention? Is there a tension in accountability versus professional development? Do we develop teachers based on accountability scores?
Depending on where you are, depending on the district. So I am taking from one system I was involved in, you know, where I say I was raised, like, you know, I was raised in DISD. So
Yeah.
my mindset when I come down, or when I not come down, rather when I shifted to Plano ISD, you know, the mindset and their system is different, right? So their rules, their simple rules and everything else. So but however, the same problem I keep seeing exists in those areas where the areas where are those campuses where the students are not proficient readers, no matter DISD or PISD, I see that there is the professional development of teachers is not challenging, and there's not accountability, like where there's the accountability of the way that we're teaching our teachers. Like,
So who
so
needs to be
I guess
accountable?
that's where I feel as though if we were to look at how the system goes, how you described it, where you look at the top and then you start making those adjustments, I think we're going to start at the top of administration, and then it comes down and it trickles down. Well, let me just rephrase that. We look at the whole system, but we look starting at the bottom, so looking at the teachers being accountable, being self-directed learners. I don't think there's a whole lot of accountability there. And then I think that the theme that kept emerging through my interviews when I was talking to teachers and administrators about building administrators, that they are, I think they have these ideas or these plans they want to execute, but there's not any, it's not translating into the classroom. It's not being impactful into the classroom. And that's not all campuses, but.
Okay. You described your system in a nutshell there. You have a lot going on in what you
Always do.
I hear a lot going on.
Doctors.
I know. And so there's two things that I think of. One, I just have more questions for you that we have to break it down, and that we might do at another time. But take a risk, if you don't mind, and maybe start answering some of these questions, because some of the questions that are on this table might help you synthesize what you're looking for. Because I can help you think, but I can't answer them for you. You're the only one that can decide those things.
I'll definitely circle back to you one-on-one. I don't mean to take up time, but I was just trying to synthesize.
Oh,
and
well,
luckily, all these people know me really well. I butt in with my
I
my
want to be able
extraness.
to help each one of you, and I think the discussion is, I would like to think that it is useful, because somebody else is probably thinking something in their own way concerning their own problems. So, but take the time, because sometimes we think out loud, and I'm an auditory type of learner, and I talk it through, and I think that's ultimately what we need. And I talk entirely too much, so I was hoping that we would use these sessions for you guys to talk to each other, but maybe that was too much for me to think. That wasn't a fair assessment for myself. Use this. I think what I'd like you to do is take some time to work these models for yourself to start. This is not formal. This is your thinking plate. And if you can post in the discussion, I don't know if I put that up there or not. I have to put a space so that you can share your thinking, because when you read how everyone else is processing it, it might help you. Not you, Sherry, or I'm sorry, Sophia, specifically you as a whole, each of you in your own journeys, because it is a journey. So think through these questions. Look at your adaptive action cycle for yourself. It takes some time to do that. And look at what your container is, what your differences and exchanges are, and start to look for patterns, because when that's you mapping your system, what that's going to look like when you turn this in at the end is going to maybe a bunch of circles and lines. It may be these charts. It may be something that you make sense out of this work that you are doing. I wish I could be more concrete. Here was something I was trying to type out that I ran out of time, and I apologize. It came from this book, but it's just looking at the conditions of a complex adaptive system. It's pretty much what we just wrote. I thought I already wrote this. So you're thinking about who are you together, what matters most to your work, and how do you work together on what matters? And that's the exchanges. the things that connect you and the things that separate you. You look at your similarities, and we'll continue to work similarities and differences probably next week. The last thing, because I know we're going to run out of time, and I'm happy to stay online with anyone that wants to continue to do this out loud. But I just wanted to show you how it all kind of fits together. You discover the boundaries that define your space. So I think that's why Sophia is got a lot on her mind, because she hasn't discovered specifically yet which boundaries she's wanting to look at. And that may take some time. And she's probably not the only one. Then explore the differences that make a difference in your system as you see it now. You may see it differently. You're also going to be doing literature reviews, remember. I'm expecting you haven't started to do that. And I thought, gosh, I should have asked them to do that in this class, but I thought that's way too much in this 1 month.
We've written literature reviews.
Okay, sorry.
It's okay, we can take a 4-week break.
Well,
I'm just kidding, Dr. Slay.
then that said, you have information. You have information that you can bring to the table because you have been looking at what's going on in your system through the literature, through other researchers, through things that you have learned in your courses and your experiences. And then you're going to focus on the connections between and among yourselves. And you're doing that by using the adaptive action cycle to find logical patterns. And all of those create and become the conditions for existence, for emergence, for change within your complex system. And that's why it's constantly adaptive. I hope this picture kind of helps synthesize where we're going. You might think of your patterns in terms, and I can give you an example, Sherry, a specific example of how, and it'll come out of this book for this, what's written down, the current pattern, etc. You can then take one pattern and break it down and think in terms of nouns. Now, this is getting into qualitative research talk, because you'll see this I don't know if you've done any research courses yet, but you'll start learning about how, I'm not sure who teaches the qualitative research class, but you'll look in things in terms of nouns and verbs, etc. So I'm going to stop there because I think I'm going to make it really messy. What time is it? It's exactly 8 o'clock. Wow. So where do we go from here? I'm going to post this, and I will post the diagram. I mean the Zoom if you choose to listen to this again. I'll try to get you some more specific examples to help move this forward for those of you that would like to have that support. And do some thinking. You can share what you've got with the group on Padlet simply because it helps all of us think collectively. But then include it in your Sunday reflections too, because this is where you're at, and this will help you arrive at the end. And then you'll decide what that looks like when we get there. And I'll help you in any way that I can. If you would like to stay online with me, I'm happy to continue talking or working through any of this, or thinking aloud with you, or if anyone wants a breakout room, I'm happy to open one. Otherwise, I'm going to stop recording. And oh, a bunch of chats came in. I'm so sorry I didn't catch any
It's
of that.
on me.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for thinking out loud. It's
We're
sometimes
typically a way more talkative group than this, Dr. Slade, just so you know. I think everybody is kind of like, we're tired and coming off of the year. I know that I think Addie, you weren't in our spring classes with us, but for the most of us, we were in the same classes, of course. And usually
Well,
Sherry must be busy because typically she